When Season of Discovery was announced at BlizzCon, it was the most hype moment of the event for me. I mean, yeah, I'll probably end up checking the retail expansion out as I always do, and as much as I was looking forward to Kata and have been enjoying it so far, I was kind of expecting that to happen. Season of Discovery just came way out of left field, and while some form of Classic Plus would have been on many people's bingo cards, it was still crazy to see Blizzard really commit to it, to give us that vanilla experience once again, but this time with some things being different. We had phased level caps, new craftable items and profession quests, no PTR testing to keep things hidden, new class identities such as Mage Healer, Shaman Tank and so on, and of course the runes that they teased at BlizzCon. And whilst early on for Season of Discovery the phrase Classic Plus was thrown around a lot, both by Blizzard and the community, it's become apparent that's not really what it was meant to be. For me personally, Classic Plus cannot be seasonal for a start, and it can't be an expansion either. If there's a cutoff point to the content, that's fine if that's what it's meant to be, but MMORPGs are meant to be these persistent worlds that you can come back to. And as for expansions, in World of Warcraft, they just tend to replace content instead of building on it. What Season of Discovery has really been for me has been a big testing grounds for implementing new ideas and seeing how they're received, both from the point of view of adding totally new content into the game such as the Ashenvale or STV PvP events, to trying to balance classes a bit better than they did in original vanilla. But the levels of hype for Season of Discovery on its launch were massive. I bet Blizzard were blown away by the sheer amount of people resubbing to see what all the fuss was about. After all, if Blizzard could deliver on this, it had the chance to be huge, and as it went live, thousands of people jumped back into the world of vanilla once again. And whilst I'm, of course, planning to do a full review of Season of Discovery once all is said and done, we can have a small and brief retrospective to where we've gotten to where we are today. Phase 1 of the season came around and boy did it deliver. Leveling to 25 could be done very casually in a short space of time, runes were easy to come by during leveling, the BFD raid was 10 man on a 3-day lockout, there were loads of people running ults, and the unviable specs of vanilla became viable. If you ever had dreams of playing a Shaman Tank or maybe doing something that's never been seen before in WoW, such as a Mage Healer, this was your chance to do it. There were some issues, don't get me wrong, Ashenvale had to undergo half a dozen changes in a reset or so, and hunters could solo any other class in the game using their Scorpion pet with Eyes of the Beast. It was hilarious and broken in equal measure, but it was fresh, and you know what? Fresh is fun. It's really hard to get fresh wrong. Soon after that, Phase 2 dropped, raising the level cap to 40, and this is where momentum began to shift, and notably, slow down. Despite the leveling being a lot more bite-sized than it usually is in vanilla, being on the foot for the majority of the time started to take its toll with just how long everything in the game takes to do. And whilst runes were given to you super early in Phase 1, by Phase 2 oftentimes you had to be well into your level 30s before you'd see anything new gameplay-wise. And when you combined runes such as the Campfire one that starts in Desolus and ends in Arathi Highlands, or Dark Riders with no riding and needing to do them across multiple characters, the disjointed travelling started to wear heavy on those who would have invested into ults in Phase 1. The STV PvP event rolled around, and it had to get just as many changes as Ashenvale did to get it in a solid state, and it also started to highlight the crazy levels of power creep we'd seen. The whole gameplay in PvP was one shot or be one shot, and Gnomeregan as the new raid had some fights where not knowing the tactics would just wipe you, and it definitely up the difficulty compared to BFD. And as we currently are, we are in Phase 3. Alongside raising the level cap to 50, one of the core new features of the phase was the PvE focused Nightmare incursions, which, not to go into a rant you've heard 100 times over by now, we'll save that for the full review, believe me, but this was not a great feature for many players. Simply put, they just ended up being the best way to do everything from gaining experience, new gear, gold, even a rune, and the core gameplay loop of them mimicking the Cenarian hold rep was just not that much fun either. Runes continued to be lengthy journeys by and large across the world, which made prospects of doing this on an alt less fun, and by this time we had well over a dozen runes to collect if you did start to want a new character, and some of those runes needed more than one person to get as well. And for the raid, Sunken Temple started off being comically overtuned, before being gradually nerfed down to a more reasonable state. Even then, the loot in there was often not that exciting up until Blizzard buffed it recently, but it feels as though it's a bit too little too late. Which gets us to where we are today, looking ahead to Phase 4. And Phase 4 has to achieve quite a lot if it wants to bring Season of Discovery back to some of its former glory. You know, we're just over 6 months into the season at the moment. This is a server which could very well last about 12 months or so total. It's about time we got to level cap, isn't it? One of the first things to mention about Phase 4 is that it will have a PTR, and honestly, I'm glad we're getting these back. No PTR was initially a cool idea to keep things fresh, but people go through content at such a pace and word spreads so fast via forums, Reddit, Discord and so on, that it just didn't have its desired impact. Pretty much everything, bar some runes which were bugged in Phase 1, were found out in a matter of a day or two, and the discovery aspect insofar as finding how to do the new stuff only really happened for those on the Discords who could play all day every day. For the average player, finding your runes without looking them up online after Phase 1 would have been really challenging. The game just doesn't throw you that many hints. Blizzard also left the ability to data mine future content as a possibility, so at the end of the day, what was the point of not having a PTR? I know with retail they encrypt things which could be story spoilers all of the time, so they can do this if they want to, they just didn't. Anyways, we're getting a bit off track here, but the point is, Phase 4 will have a PTR. They say about this, we're going to spin up a limited time PTR specifically focused on combat and class testing for Phase 4. We plan to include level 60 templates with all runes and abilities learned, and we tentatively plan to provide some sort of access to the level 60 tier set bonuses. We also plan to provide access to training dummies and some raid content as well as battlegrounds so players can test their new builds. So for once we're going to be going into this phase with far more testing done on our full endgame builds, and hopefully this means there won't be any more huge outliers which are just basically useless from the get-go or broken beyond belief. I'm not expecting perfect by any means, but for me this is a positive step. For what it's worth, the classes and how they play in raiding are more interesting than they were in vanilla for me. Any departure from a one-button rotation is a good thing. When we hit 60, vanilla also just has tons more endgame by default, so you'll have a lot more to do weekly than just your 45-minute Sunken Temple. Blizzard also mentioned they will match the content releases similar to how it was in 2019. So what that'll mean is first up we'll have Molten Core and Onyxia, and a few weeks later, that's in their words, we'll see Blackwing Lair. And then after that we'll have future raid content, as well as some surprises in between. I have to say vanilla raids with their world buffs, consume stacking and group-wide buffs might not be my favourite version of how raiding has worked in this game, but you can't say there isn't a lot of stuff worth doing, right from Molten Core for your binding runs all the way to Naxxramas. You might also remember when they first teased Season of Discovery at BlizzCon, they showed a few panels with Scarlet Monastery, Gnomeregan, and the Karazhan Crypts, alluding to possible future content, and it's been 50-50 on that happening or not so far. I'm not gonna lie, if we didn't get Kara Crypts now, it would be quite the letdown after not seeing anything new done with Scarlet Monastery, but who knows how much time they'd have had to work on everything. Also, we have to consider raid size at level 60, so we know Molten Core will be 20 player, this has been confirmed, but Blizzard did say after that they have some desire to return at least one raid to being 40 player, and that downsizing raids may be more difficult than expected, and from what I can tell people are super split on this. I did a poll a while ago which got around 14,000 votes, with 41% of people wanting raids to go back to 40 player and 59% saying no. I have to say 40 player raids are one of those original vanilla design experiences which you can only get from that version of the game, but these days the logistics of putting groups that big together is just really difficult. Maybe for a seasonal server, it's better to go on the side of accessibility, despite it not being entirely vanilla-like. For me, it feels as though most people that really want to organize 40-player raiding are doing it on Classic era at the moment, and given all the changes on Season of Discovery, it's a bit of a different player base. This one's a really hard one to call, we'll see what they end up doing with it, but they do seem to want to have at least one 40-player raid. Blizzard has also mentioned they plan to re-itemize many endgame pieces of gear too. There will be new tier set bonuses too, aimed at the new class combos as well as existing specs. And I'm expecting some form of tier token to be heavily attached to this too, by the way. In vanilla, tier just straight up drops and there's only one version of it, which is why your druids would get their full tier set in 2 raids, and other classes will be fighting over theirs for weeks, if not months. Imagine in Season of Discovery you kill a boss and it drops your warlock tank tier for the 3rd time in a row. That's not going to feel too good, is it? We need to see what Blizzard end up doing with incursions too. If we follow the release schedule of Vanilla Classic, then the Green Dragon World bosses will be added into the game around the same time as ZG. And if you don't know what that means, well, you know those portals you go through to do incursions? They're going to have massive Green Dragon World bosses put in front of them who will one-shot anyone without a serious raid group behind them. I remember people in Season of Mastery would layer hop to farm these world bosses, but I'm pretty sure Blizzard fixed that at some point in time. Anyways, this happening in the world seems as though it could be a time to wrap up incursions here, and maybe just leave some easy way to cap out the rep in the game. I also think it's important that incursions don't become the meta for leveling once again. I mean, they definitely got people out of dungeon grinding, but I don't think it was much of an improvement. Questing for me has always been solid in this game, and I think it should be the fastest way to level through quest reward XP. Dungeons can always be a viable alternative which is slower, but they have their own benefits in that you don't have to deal with open world competition and the aspect of farming pre-raid bis as well. Speaking of dungeons, the wild offering system was interesting from phase 3, and as much as I like it in theory, I hope Blizzard have taken some lessons from how people used it, where they just rushed to the end bosses. You can put together a raid group for any dungeon in the game other than Scholomance or BRD in vanilla. Don't ask me why, that's vanilla for you. But usually you would never ever do this because you can't complete regular quests in a raid, more competition for loot, and it would affect your experience gained. The only, I guess, dungeon that you always make a raid group for is UBRS, but that's its own thing. The rest of the time you never value having a raid group going into a dungeon unless we have this weird scenario such as wild offerings. But I do think the wild offering system has potential. As amazing as dungeons are in vanilla, they tend to have a very short lifespan. People blast through them, they get their prebis, and then 2 weeks later you're trying to pay a tank to get him to come along and run the dungeon for you. I remember during 2019 playing Classic on Gehenna's Alliance. This was a very popular server back then. By the end of the second reset, it was a struggle to get a tank for Scholomance because the incentive just isn't there to keep running them once you're done with them. Wild offerings maybe could help in this scenario and give a bit more life to this 5-man content. Moving on to PvP, so we've had 2 new PvP events this season, Ashenvale in phase 1 and STV in phase 2, and then in phase 3 there was nothing new, but there's a lot of battlegrounds and 2 PvP events, so I actually think there's not a bad amount of content if you are into PvP balance aside that is. But in the final phase there are 2 events in the game already, those being in Silithus and Eastern Plaguelands. The kind of issue with them is they're both, well, how can I put this? Pretty terrible. Maybe they could be used for some future PvP related content, but as it stands at the moment, there really just isn't a ton of substance to them. In Silithus, you pick some items up across the floor in the zone and carry it to a guy and then get a small buff, and the first faction to reach 200 gets a rep buff within the raids in Silithus, and in EPL it's like a King of the Hill system with a bunch of towers, and the more towers you control, the more various buffs you get within the zone, and that's it. Maybe there could be some more rewards tied to these activities, or just some kind of gameplay change which would incentivize people to go and play them. Either way, these are 2 PvP related open world activities in the game right now, so hopefully they are reworked a little bit. The PvP events so far have been kind of hit and miss. They've all come out as fresh ideas and have needed so many changes to get them in a good state, and the power creep from new runes and gear has made the PvP meta extremely burst heavy. I mean, to be fair, it already was in vanilla, but this is on a whole other level. Blizzard have been testing reducing damage taken and reducing the effectiveness of healing in PvP to try and course correct the bursty nature of the season. Not gonna lie, feels like they're just putting resilience in the game without you having to actually change your gear set, but if it stops people from getting one-shots, I guess that's the goal. It really feels to me like over the years, balancing both PvE and PvP under one talent and ability system has proven an impossible task to do, and we're just seeing this play out once again for I don't know how many times. Take Shadow Priest for instance, you take one to a raid and it'll barely appear on the DPS meters, you take one to a battleground and they're probably going to be one of the most valuable assets on your team. Also to think about in the final phase will be the ranking sets from 7 through 10, which were very good back in vanilla and were used as pre-raid gear, if not phase 1 bis for some classes. Will these sets be outdated with the new raid gear? Will they be updated? And will this gear release at the start of phase 4? And then later on we have the epic PvP sets from rank 12 to 14, which people tend to agree they're somewhat similar to the power level of the gear released in AQ40, but again, will this gear be outdated by that point in time? Will it already be in the game earlier than that? I remember in Season of Mastery they put ranking out with the availability to get rank 14 gear straight away, and people just rushed towards that and ignored a lot of the raid-based upgrades. Still waiting for information on this by the way, but I think it's just something important to think about and be aware of. Overall, I reckon the baseline content on offer up to level 60 in vanilla is already quite strong, and even without adding anything new, there's a bunch to keep people occupied, at least for a while. PTR class balancing with full rune sets and tier gear is going against what Blizzard initially set out to do with keeping things hidden, but so far that's had pretty mixed results due to a lack of encrypting data mine info and certain runes being pushed to live in either a useless or broken overpowered state. Hopefully whatever the new content they've got cooking is a bit of a better surprise than what incursions were, and speaking of incursions, I hope the meta isn't gonna be leveling through them again. I think you're gonna lose a lot of people if they see that the moment the patch drops. Phase 4 is definitely the content patch to win back a lot of players following Phase 3. Phase 3 itself has done quite a bit of harm to the seasonal community. Myself, I've really not been thinking that much about Season of Discovery since Cataclysm's come out, till I decided to make this video, but once Blizzard puts out some more information, we learn a bit more about the new runes, and we hear about what Blizzard are planning for Phase 4, I expect there to be quite an uptick in interest to the seasonal server. I think Season of Discovery has the potential to bring back a pretty decent chunk of players, at least for the initial hype endgame and pre-bis gearing period of time. That always tends to be fun, but Phase 4 really does have its work cut out if it is going to get people to come back and then stay. So whilst where we're at right now is definitely the low point of the season, vanilla just tends to deliver time and again. And personally, I know I'm going to be checking out Phase 4 for sure and seeing how everything is in the game. How's it looking for you though? Are you planning to go back to the season to see what's up? What are you hoping to see change, and what are you maybe looking forwards to as well? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you on the next one very soon.